an original story narrated exclusively for Love Written in Silence. The winter light falls cold through the tall windows of the ballroom, casting long shadows across marble floors, where dancers pause mid-step. Duchess Arabella Greyford stands perfectly still in her ivory gown, her gloved hands clasped before her, while a woman in crimson silk steps forward with eyes bright with challenge. The woman's voice cuts through the music like a blade, demanding a choice that will reshape everything. Duke Sebastian Greyford turns slowly, his face unreadable, and the entire room holds its breath. He extends his hand, not toward the woman who spoke, but toward his wife. Arabella's fingers tremble as they meet his palm, and in that single gesture, 8 years of silence begin to crack open. The grand ballroom of Thornbury House glowed beneath 1,000 candles, their light reflecting off crystal chandeliers and polished floors. Winter pressed against the tall windows, frost creeping along the edges of the glass, but inside the air was warm with the breath of 200 guests. The annual charity ball was the pinnacle of the social season, and everyone who mattered had come. Duchess Arabella Greyford stood near the eastern wall, her posture flawless, her expression serene. She wore a gown of pale ivory, silk that fell in elegant lines from her shoulders to the floor. Her dark hair was arranged in a simple chignon, adorned with a single strand of pearls. She had learned long ago how to hold herself in public, chin level, hands relaxed, eyes attentive, but not searching. She had learned how to be present without demanding attention. Beside her, Duke Sebastian Greyford conversed with Lord Ashford about matters of Parliament. He was tall and lean, his dark coat perfectly tailored, his voice measured and calm. He spoke with the authority of a man, accustomed to being heard. His hair was touched with gray at the temples, though he was only 34. His face was handsome in a severe way, all sharp lines and controlled expression. They had been married for 8 years. 8 years of shared meals and separate chambers. 8 years of public appearances and private silence. 8 years of respect without intimacy. Arabella had long since accepted the nature of their union. It had been arranged by their families, a match of equal standing, beneficial to both estates. She had been 21, hopeful and naive. He had been 26, already absorbed in the complexities of political life. She had tried, in the early months, to reach him. She had asked about his work, his interests, his thoughts. He had answered with courtesy and distance. She had invited him to walk the gardens, to discuss books, to share more than formalities. He had politely declined, citing obligations and responsibilities. Eventually, she had stopped trying. She had learned to be ornamental, rather than essential. She had learned to fill her days with charitable work, correspondence, and the management of household affairs that did not require his attention. She had learned to be a duchess in title and appearance, but not in partnership. The music swelled, a waltz that sent couples spinning across the floor. Arabella watched them with a faint smile, the kind she had perfected for occasions like this. She did not expect Sebastian to ask her to dance. He never did. Then the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened, and a woman entered. She was striking, tall and elegant, with auburn hair piled high, and a gown of deep crimson that clung to her figure. She moved with confidence, her gaze sweeping the room until it landed on the Duke. Arabella felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter outside. The woman's name was Vivian Harcourt. Arabella knew of her, though they had never been introduced. Vivian had been Sebastian's companion before their marriage, a relationship that had ended when duty required him to wed. It had been discreet, as such things always were among their class, but not invisible. Vivian crossed the ballroom with purpose, her eyes fixed on Sebastian. Conversations faltered as she passed. Heads turned. The musicians played on, oblivious, but the dancers began to slow. She stopped directly in front of them. Sebastian's expression did not change, but Arabella saw the faint tightening of his jaw. "Your Grace," Vivian said, her voice clear and carrying. "How lovely to see you again." "Miss Harcourt," Sebastian replied, his tone neutral. Vivian's gaze shifted to Arabella, cool and assessing. "And the Duchess, of course. You look well." Arabella inclined her head slightly. "Thank you." The air between them was taut, charged with unspoken history. Around them, the ballroom had gone quiet. Even the music seemed to fade into the background. Vivian turned back to Sebastian, and her expression shifted. Something raw and unguarded flickered across her face. "I have waited long enough," she said, her voice dropping but still audible to those nearby. "I have been patient. I have been silent, but I will not stand aside any longer." Sebastian's face remained impassive. "This is neither the time nor the place for such a conversation." Then when Vivian's voice rose, sharp with frustration. "You have avoided me for months. You refuse my letters. You will not receive me. What choice do I have but to speak here, where you cannot turn away?" Arabella's heart beat faster, but she kept her face calm. She felt the weight of every gaze in the room, the avid curiosity, the barely concealed delight at witnessing such a spectacle. Vivian took a breath, steadying herself. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but no less intense. "I loved you before duty claimed you. I love you still, and I know you feel the same." She paused, and then delivered the words that would echo through every drawing room in the city for weeks to come. "Choose her or me." The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. Arabella felt as though the floor had tilted beneath her. She stood frozen, her hands still clasped before her, her face a mask of composure. Inside, her mind raced. What would he say? What could he say? And why, after 8 years of indifference, did the answer suddenly matter so much? Sebastian did not speak. He did not look at Vivian. Instead, he turned slowly toward Arabella. His gray eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw something in them she could not name: regret, perhaps, or resolve. He extended his hand, not toward Vivian, toward her. Arabella stared at his outstretched hand as though it were a foreign object. Her breath caught. Around them, the crowd stirred, a ripple of shock spreading outward. Sebastian's voice was low, meant only for her. "Arabella." She looked up at him, searching his face for meaning. His expression was unreadable, but his hand remained steady, waiting. Slowly, she placed her gloved hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, firm and deliberate. He did not let go. He turned back to Vivian, his face still calm, still controlled. "You have your answer." Vivian's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "You choose duty over love. You always have." "I choose my wife," Sebastian said quietly, "as I should have done long ago." He did not wait for her response. He guided Arabella forward, his hand still holding hers, and they walked together through the parted crowd. The whispers began before they reached the door, a low hum that would grow into a roar by morning. Arabella moved as though in a dream, her hand warm in his, her heart pounding so hard, she thought it might break through her ribs. She did not look back. She did not look at the faces watching them. She looked only at the doors ahead, and at the man beside her, whose silence had just spoken louder than any declaration. They stepped into the corridor, and the doors closed behind them, muffling the noise of the ballroom. The air was cooler here, quieter. Sebastian released her hand. Arabella turned to face him, her composure finally cracking. "Why did you do that?" He met her gaze, and for the first time in 8 years, she saw uncertainty in his eyes. "Because it was the truth." "What truth?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That you are bound to me by law. That you could not humiliate me publicly. That you are my wife," he said simply, "and I have failed you." She stared at him, unable to speak. He looked away, his jaw tight. "We should go home." Arabella nodded, though she did not understand. She did not understand anything that had just happened. But she followed him down the corridor, through the entrance hall, and out into the cold winter night, where their carriage waited. The carriage ride home was suffocating in its silence. Arabella sat across from Sebastian, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the window. Outside, the city passed in a blur of gaslight and shadow. Inside, the air was thick with words unspoken. She replayed the scene in her mind. The ballroom, the confrontation, the choice. She had expected him to offer some explanation, some reassurance. But he said nothing. He sat with his arms crossed, his face turned toward the opposite window, as distant as ever. Arabella's thoughts drifted back to the beginning. Their wedding had been a grand affair, attended by half the peerage. She had worn white silk and carried roses. He had looked handsome and solemn. They had spoken their vows in voices clear and steady, and she had believed, in her youthful hope, that affection might grow between them. It had not. In the early months, she had tried to bridge the distance. She had asked him about his work in Parliament, about the trade agreements and political alliances that consumed his days. He had answered politely, but briefly, as though explaining to a child who could not truly understand. She had suggested they dine together more often, that they share more than the obligatory public appearances. He had agreed, but his presence at those meals had been perfunctory, his mind clearly elsewhere. She had tried to interest him in her own pursuits, her charity work, her correspondence with scholars, her love of history and literature. He had listened with courteous attention, but never engaged, never asked questions, never offered his own thoughts. Slowly, she had realized that he did not see her as a partner. He saw her as a responsibility, a role to be fulfilled, a piece of the estate to be managed with the same careful attention he gave to everything else. She had stopped trying. She had retreated into her own world, filling her days with activities that did not require his involvement. She had learned to be content with the surface of their marriage, the public respect, the shared name, the appearance of unity. But beneath that surface, she had been lonely, achingly, endlessly lonely. The carriage jolted over a rough patch of road, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at Sebastian. He had not moved. His face was shadowed, unreadable. "Why did you do it?" she asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. He did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. "Because it was necessary." "Necessary," she repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "Not because you wanted to. Because it was necessary." He turned to look at her then, and she saw something in his eyes, something almost like pain. "Arabella, do not," she said, cutting him off. "Do not offer me platitudes. I have lived with your silence for 8 years. I have learned to read what you do not say." She looked away, her throat tight. "You chose me because you had no other choice. Because to do otherwise would have been a scandal. That is not true, isn't it?" She met his gaze again, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You have never wanted me as a wife. You have wanted me as a symbol, a decoration, a name to stand beside yours at events like tonight." Her voice broke slightly. "And now I am supposed to be grateful that you did not humiliate me in front of 200 people. Sebastian's jaw tightened. "You do not understand." "Then explain it to me," she said, her voice rising. "Explain why you have kept me at arm's length for 8 years. Explain why you have never once asked what I think, what I want, what I feel. Explain why I am your wife in name only." He looked away, his hands clenching into fists. "I thought I was protecting you. From what?" "From the ugliness of my world," he said quietly. "From the politics, the schemes, the betrayals. I thought if I kept you separate from it, you would be safe. You would be untouched." Arabella stared at him, her anger giving way to something colder. "You thought you were protecting me by making me invisible." He flinched, and she knew she had struck a nerve. But she did not soften. She could not. "I did not need your protection," she said, her voice steady now. "I needed your partnership. I needed to be seen, to be heard, to be more than a decoration in your life." The carriage slowed, and Arabella realized they had arrived at the manor. The driver opened the door, and cold air rushed in. She stepped out without waiting for Sebastian, her skirts sweeping across the cobblestones. The manor loomed before them, its windows dark except for a few lit rooms on the ground floor. It was a beautiful house, ancient stone and ivy, surrounded by gardens that bloomed in spring and lay dormant, now beneath frost. It had been her home for 8 years, but it had never felt like hers. She walked up the steps and through the front door, not looking back to see if Sebastian followed. The butler greeted them with a bow, but she barely acknowledged him. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, where their chambers lay at opposite ends of a long corridor. She entered her room and closed the door behind her, leaning against it for a moment. Her heart was still racing, her hands trembling. She crossed to the window and looked out at the gardens below, where frost glittered in the moonlight. What did tonight mean? What did any of it mean? Sebastian had taken her hand. He had chosen her. But had he chosen her? Or had he simply chosen duty? Had he acted out of love or obligation? She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, her breath fogging the surface. She did not know. And that uncertainty was worse than any answer could have been. The days that followed brought consequences Arabella had not anticipated. Invitations that had once arrived daily began to dwindle. When she did attend social events, she was met with sympathetic glances that felt more like pity than kindness. Women who had once sought her company now kept their distance, as though scandal were contagious. Lady Thornbury, a woman whose opinions shaped much of society's discourse, cornered her at a small luncheon 3 days after the ball. "My dear Duchess," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "How brave of you to appear in public after such an ordeal." Arabella kept her expression neutral. "I see no reason to hide, Lady Thornbury." "Of course not," Lady Thornbury said, though her smile suggested otherwise. "Still, it must be difficult. A wife's position is always uncertain when there are complications." "Complications," Arabella repeated, her tone flat. "Well, you know how men are," Lady Thornbury continued, leaning closer as though sharing a confidence. "They feel obligated to do the right thing, even when their hearts lie elsewhere. It is admirable, really. But one does wonder how long such duty can sustain a marriage." Arabella felt a cold fury rise in her chest, but she forced herself to smile. "I have no concerns about my marriage, Lady Thornbury. But thank you for your consideration." She excused herself and left the luncheon early, her composure intact, but her heart heavy. The message was clear. Society did not see Sebastian's gesture as a declaration of devotion. They saw it as obligation, duty, a man doing what was expected, not what he desired. And perhaps they were right. At home, Arabella found herself wandering the manor's corridors, restless and uncertain. She had always kept herself occupied, managing the household, corresponding with friends, organizing charitable efforts. But now those tasks felt hollow. She could not shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, and she did not know how to navigate it. One afternoon, she found herself in the library, a room she had always loved. It was filled with books from floor to ceiling, the scent of leather and old paper comforting and familiar. She ran her fingers along the spines, searching for something to occupy her mind. Her hand paused on a volume she did not recognize, a ledger, bound in dark leather, tucked between 2 larger books. She pulled it out and opened it, expecting household accounts or estate records. Instead, she found correspondence. Letters addressed to Sebastian, some dating back years. She knew she should not read them. They were private, not meant for her eyes. But something made her pause. One letter, dated a year before their marriage, caught her attention. It was from her father. Her breath caught. She sat down in the nearest chair and began to read. The letter was formal, written in her father's precise hand. It discussed a trade agreement, a regional compact involving several families. There were references to debts, to obligations, to guarantees. And then, near the end, a phrase that made her stomach turn. "The marriage will secure the arrangement. My daughter's name will bind the agreement, and your family's silence will ensure no scandal touches mine." Arabella read the letter again, then a third time, trying to make sense of it. Her father had arranged her marriage not just for alliance, but for protection. Protection from what? She set the letter aside and began searching the library more carefully. She found more correspondence, tucked into drawers and hidden behind other volumes. Letters between her father and Sebastian's father. References to a failed trade compact, to debts that would have ruined several families, to agreements signed in secret. Her father had been involved in something that went wrong, something that left obligations unpaid and reputations at risk. And Sebastian's family had absorbed the cost in exchange for political leverage and a guarantee of silence, a guarantee secured by her marriage. Arabella sat back, her hands shaking. She had been a pawn. A piece moved across a board to protect her father's name and secure Sebastian's family's influence. And Sebastian had known. He had known all along. Is that why he had kept her at a distance? To protect her from the truth, or to protect himself from her questions? She stood, the letters clutched in her hand, and walked to Sebastian's study. She did not knock. She opened the door and found him at his desk, papers spread before him. He looked up, startled. "Arabella, I know," she said, her voice shaking. "I know about the agreement, about my father, about why you married me." His face went pale. He stood slowly, his hands braced on the desk. "How did you? Does it matter?" she interrupted. "What matters is that you have kept this from me for 8 years. You have let me believe I was nothing more than a decoration, when in truth, I was a guarantee, a piece of collateral. That is not how I see you, he said, his voice tight. Isn't it? She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. You married me to secure silence, to protect your family's interests. And you have kept me ignorant of it all, because you thought I could not handle the truth. I thought I was protecting you, he said, his voice rising. Your father's failure would have destroyed you. It would have destroyed your family's name. I took on the burden so you would not have to. By making me invisible, she demanded. By keeping me in the dark. By treating me as though I were too fragile to be trusted with the truth. He opened his mouth to respond, but she did not let him. You thought you were being kind. You thought you were sparing me. But all you did was rob me of my dignity, my voice, my right to know the truth about my own life. She threw the letters onto his desk. I will not be protected in the shadows any longer. Sebastian stared at the letters, his jaw tight. What do you want me to do? I want you to stop treating me like a child, she said, her voice steady now. I want you to tell me everything. And then I want you to let me decide what to do about it. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the conflict in his eyes, fear, guilt, uncertainty. Finally, he nodded. Very well. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Arabella sat, her hands folded in her lap, her heart pounding. And for the first time in 8 years, Sebastian began to tell her the truth. The truth, as it unfolded, was not romantic. It was cold, institutional, bound by legal language and political necessity. Her father, Lord Ashton Mercer, had been part of a regional trade compact, a coalition of families and merchants who pooled resources to invest in shipping ventures. The compact had promised significant returns, but it had failed spectacularly. Ships were lost, investments vanished, debts mounted. Several families faced ruin, her father among them. Sebastian's family, the Greyfords, had the resources to absorb the losses, but they did not do so out of charity. They negotiated terms. They took on the debts in exchange for political leverage, votes in parliament, influence over regional appointments, control over trade routes, and they demanded silence. No public acknowledgement of the failure, no scandal, no questions. The marriage had been part of that agreement. Arabella's name, tied to the Greyfords, ensured that her father's failure would remain buried, and Sebastian's silence ensured that the compact's collapse would never become public knowledge. It was not personal, Sebastian said, his voice weary. It was business, politics, the way things are done. Arabella listened without interrupting, her face composed, but her mind racing. When he finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. You thought you were protecting me, she said finally, but you were protecting yourself, your family's reputation, your political alliances. Both, he admitted. I did not want you to carry the weight of your father's failure, but I also could not risk the truth coming out. Too many people would have been hurt, including you. He did not deny it. Arabella stood, her hands clasped before her. I understand why you did it. I even understand why you kept it from me. She met his gaze, her eyes hard. But I will not accept it any longer. Sebastian frowned. What do you mean? I mean that if my name is tied to your politics, I will not be the only one ignorant of it, she said firmly. I will not be a silent partner in agreements I know nothing about. I will not be used as a shield while you make decisions that affect my life. Arabella, you do not understand the complexity. Then explain it to me, she interrupted. Teach me, include me. But do not patronize me by suggesting I cannot comprehend what you do. He stared at her, clearly taken aback. The alliances are fragile. If the truth about the compact comes out, it could destroy everything we have built. Then let it be destroyed, she said calmly. If it is built on lies and silence, it deserves to fall. You do not mean that. I do. She stepped closer, her voice steady and resolute. I will request a formal review of the agreement before the regional council. I will ask that the clause binding my father's name to your family's silence be dissolved, and I will do so publicly. Sebastian's face went white. That would expose your father's failure. It would subject your family to scrutiny, to judgment. I know, she said quietly, but I would rather carry the weight of truth than the shame of silence. He shook his head, his hands bracing on the desk. You do not know what you are asking. The council will not be kind. They will question everything. They will demand answers you may not want to give. Then I will give them, she said. I am not afraid of the truth, Sebastian. I am only afraid of living in the dark. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or reluctantly dawning respect. You are serious. I am. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging. If you do this, there will be consequences. Political allies will withdraw their support. Social invitations will disappear. You will be judged harshly. I have already been judged, she said. At least this way, I will have earned it. Sebastian was silent for a long time. Finally, he nodded. If this is what you want, I will not stop you. It is not about what I want, Arabella said. It is about what is right. She turned and walked to the door, her heart pounding, but her resolve firm. As she reached for the handle, Sebastian's voice stopped her. Arabella, she looked back. You are braver than I gave you credit for, he said quietly. I am sorry I did not see it sooner. She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. So am I. She left the study, closing the door softly behind her. In the corridor, she leaned against the wall, her breath coming fast. She had just set in motion something that could not be undone, something that would change everything. But for the first time in 8 years, she felt like herself. News of Arabella's request spread through society with the speed of wildfire. Within days, everyone knew that the Duchess of Greyford had petitioned the regional council for a formal review of the trade compact agreements that had been sealed in secrecy for nearly a decade. The reactions were swift and varied. Some admired her boldness, calling it a courageous stand for transparency. Others called it reckless, a foolish woman meddling in matters beyond her understanding. Still others saw it as a calculated move, a bid for power in a marriage that had always been unequal. Arabella ignored them all. She spent her days preparing for the council session, reviewing documents, consulting with legal advisors, and rehearsing the statement she would deliver. Sebastian, to his credit, did not try to dissuade her. Instead, he worked alongside her, providing information, answering questions, and ensuring she had everything she needed. It was strange, working together. They had shared a home for 8 years, but they had never truly collaborated. Now, sitting across from each other in the study late into the night, they spoke with a frankness that had been absent from their marriage. You will be asked why you are bringing this forward now, Sebastian said one evening, his tone matter of fact. They will question your motives. I will tell them the truth, Arabella replied, that I was kept ignorant, and I refuse to remain so. They will not like that answer. It reflects poorly on me. Then perhaps you should have thought of that before you kept me in the dark, she said, though her tone was not unkind. He smiled faintly. Fair enough. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. Political allies began to withdraw their support, citing concerns about the Greyford family's stability. Invitations to social events dried up entirely. Even some of Arabella's closest friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. And then Vivian Harcourt reappeared. She arrived at the manor, unannounced one afternoon, her carriage pulling up to the front entrance, as though she had every right to be there. The butler informed Arabella of her presence, his expression carefully neutral. Arabella considered refusing to see her, but curiosity and a stubborn refusal to be intimidated won out. She instructed the butler to show Vivian to the drawing room. Vivian was standing by the window when Arabella entered, her posture elegant, her expression composed. She turned as Arabella closed the door behind her. Duchess, Vivian said, her tone polite but cool. Thank you for receiving me. I cannot imagine what we have to discuss, Arabella replied, her voice equally cool. Vivian smiled faintly. I think you can. Arabella crossed to the settee and sat, gesturing for Vivian to do the same. Vivian remained standing. I came to offer you counsel, Vivian said, woman to woman. How generous. Vivian ignored the sarcasm. You are making a mistake. This petition, this public review, it will destroy you. And it will destroy Sebastian. That is not your concern, Arabella said. Isn't it? Vivian stepped closer, her eyes sharp. I know him better than you do. I know what he values, what he fears, and I know that this will break him. Then perhaps he should have been honest with me from the beginning, Arabella said, her voice steady. Perhaps he should have trusted me. Vivian studied her for a long moment. You think you are being brave, but you are being foolish. You are risking everything for the sake of pride. No, Arabella said, rising to her feet. I am risking everything for the sake of truth. There is a difference. Vivian's expression hardened. You will regret this. Perhaps, Arabella said, but at least I will have made my own choice. Vivian held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned and walked to the door. She paused, her hand on the handle. He chose you at the ball because he had to, not because he wanted to. Do not mistake duty for devotion. I do not, Arabella said quietly, but I also do not mistake silence for kindness, or control for care. Vivian left without another word, the door closing softly behind her. Arabella stood alone in the drawing room, her heart pounding. Vivian's words echoed in her mind, sharp and cutting, but they did not change her resolve. If anything, they strengthened it. She would not be defined by what others thought she deserved. She would define herself. The day of the regional council session arrived cold and clear. Winter sunlight poured through the tall windows of the council chamber, illuminating the long table where officials and nobles sat in somber rows. The room was filled with observers, members of parliament, representatives from the families involved in the trade compact, and a handful of journalists who had been granted permission to attend. Arabella and Sebastian entered together, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor. She wore a gown of deep blue, simple and elegant, her hair arranged in a low chignon. She carried herself with quiet dignity, her hands steady, her expression calm. Sebastian walked beside her, his face composed but his tension visible in the set of his shoulders. He had dressed with care, his coat dark and formal, his cravat perfectly tied. They took their seats at the front of the chamber, side by side. The council chairman, Lord Pemberton, called the session to order. His voice was grave, his manner formal. We are convened today to address a petition brought forth by Duchess Arabella Greyford, requesting a review of the trade compact agreements, sealed 9 years ago. Duchess, you may begin. Arabella rose, her heart pounding but her voice steady. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times, but now that it had arrived, the weight of it pressed down on her, like a physical force. Thank you, Lord Pemberton, she said. I come before this council not to accuse, but to request transparency. 9 years ago, my father, Lord Ashton Mercer, was part of a trade compact that failed. The failure left debts and obligations that threatened several families. The Greyford family absorbed those debts in exchange for political leverage and a guarantee of silence. She paused, letting the words settle over the room. That guarantee was secured, in part, by my marriage to Duke Sebastian Greyford. I was not informed of this arrangement. I was kept ignorant of the agreements that bound my name and my family's reputation. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Lord Pemberton raised a hand for silence. Continue, Duchess. I do not bring this petition out of anger or revenge, Arabella said. I bring it because secrecy has served no one. The families still owed reparations have not been made whole. The truth of my father's failure has been buried, but it has not been resolved, and I have been denied the right to understand the circumstances of my own life. She looked directly at Lord Pemberton, her gaze unwavering. I request that the clause binding my family's name to the Greyford family's silence be dissolved. I request that the remaining debts be addressed transparently, even if it subjects my father's name to public scrutiny. And I request that this council acknowledge that secrecy, however well-intentioned, is not the same as justice. The room was silent. Arabella could feel the weight of every gaze, the judgment, the curiosity, the disbelief, but she did not falter. Lord Pemberton turned to Sebastian. Duke Greyford, you have the right to respond. Sebastian stood, his expression unreadable. I do not dispute the Duchess's account. The agreements were as she described. The debts were absorbed by my family, and the clause binding her father's name was secured by our marriage. He paused, his voice steady, but edged with something deeper. I believed, at the time, that I was acting in her best interest. I believed that protecting her from the truth was a kindness. I was wrong. A ripple of surprise moved through the chamber. Sebastian continued, his gaze shifting to Arabella. The Duchess has shown more courage in these past weeks than I have shown in 8 years of marriage. She has demanded transparency, even at personal cost. She has refused to be silenced, even when it would have been easier. And she has reminded me that partnership requires trust, not protection. He turned back to the council. I support her petition. I defer to her judgment, and I ask this council to grant her request. The room erupted in whispers. Lord Pemberton called for order, his gavel striking the table sharply. The council will deliberate. We will reconvene in 1 hour. Arabella and Sebastian returned to their seats as the chamber emptied. They sat in silence, the tension between them thick but not hostile. Finally, Sebastian spoke. You did well. I spoke the truth, she replied. That is all. It was more than that, he said quietly. You stood before them without fear. You demanded what you deserved. I have never seen you like this. She looked at him, her expression softening slightly. You have never looked. He flinched, but he did not argue. You are right. I have not, but I am looking now. Before she could respond, the council members began to return. Lord Pemberton took his seat, his expression grave. The council has reached a decision. Arabella's heart pounded as she rose to her feet. The petition is granted, Lord Pemberton said. The clause binding the Mercer family name to the Greyford family's silence is hereby dissolved. The remaining debts will be addressed through a transparent reparations process, overseen by this council, and the records of the trade compact will be made available for public review. Relief washed over Arabella, so intense it left her dizzy. She sat down, her hands trembling. Beside her, Sebastian reached over and took her hand. She did not pull away. In the days following the council session, the social landscape shifted once more. Some allies returned, cautiously but genuinely. Others did not, their disapproval too entrenched to overcome. But Arabella found that she no longer cared as much about their opinions. She had spoken her truth, and she had been heard. Vivian Harcourt left the region entirely, her presence no longer welcome or relevant. Arabella heard through gossip that she had gone abroad, seeking a fresh start. She felt no triumph at the news, only a quiet sense of closure. At home, things changed in ways both subtle and profound. Sebastian began to include her in discussions about the estate, about political matters, about decisions that affected their lives. He asked her opinion, and he listened when she gave it. They dined together more often, not out of obligation, but out of genuine interest. They walked the winter grounds side by side, their conversations ranging from the mundane to the meaningful. One evening, Arabella found herself in the empty charity hall where the ball had taken place. She had returned to oversee preparations for the next season's event. But the hall was quiet now, the chandeliers dark, the floors bare. She stood in the center of the room, remembering the moment when everything had changed. The confrontation, the choice, the silence that had followed. Footsteps echoed behind her, and she turned to see Sebastian entering. He crossed the room to stand beside her, his hands clasped behind his back. I have been thinking about that night, he said quietly, about what I said, what I did. So have I, Arabella replied. I told you I chose you because it was the truth, he continued, but I did not explain what I meant. She looked at him waiting. I meant that you are my wife, he said, not because of a contract, or an agreement, or a clause in a document, but because you are the person I share my life with. The person I should have trusted from the beginning. The person I failed, and who deserves better. Arabella felt her throat tighten. You are trying. I am, he said, and I will continue to try, for as long as you will let me. She turned to face him fully, her eyes searching his. I do not need grand gestures, Sebastian. I do not need declarations or apologies. I need partnership. I need honesty. I need to be seen. You are seen, he said, his voice low and earnest. I see you, Arabella, and I am grateful for you. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Then we begin from here. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, not as a public gesture, not as a declaration, but as an acknowledgement, a promise. They stood together in the empty hall, the winter light fading outside, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. And for the first time in 8 years, Arabella felt like she was home. The final evening came quietly, without fanfare or ceremony. The manor was still. The household settled into the rhythms of winter. Arabella sat in the drawing room, a fire burning low in the hearth, a stack of correspondence on the table before her. For the first time in her marriage, every letter that concerned the estate had been copied to her. Every decision, every negotiation, every agreement. She was included. Sebastian entered, carrying a sealed ledger. He placed it on the table between them, his expression serious. This is the last of it. The final records from the trade compact. No more secrets. Arabella looked at the ledger, then at him. Good. He moved to the window, looking out at the frost-covered gardens. She joined him, standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was companionable. I should have trusted you from the beginning, Sebastian said quietly. Yes, Arabella replied. You should have. But you trust me now. He nodded. I do. She turned to face him, her eyes steady. Then we begin from here. He reached for her hand, lifting it gently. He did not kiss it with passion or drama. He pressed it to his chest, over his heart, and held it there. An oath, a partnership. From here, he echoed. The fire crackled softly behind them. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the old paths, blanketing the gardens in white. Inside, the warmth held steady, a light that would not go out. Arabella looked at the man beside her, not the Duke, not the distant husband, but the person she had chosen to build a life with. And for the first time, she believed they might succeed. The door to the drawing room closed softly. The fire burned on, and in the quiet of the winter evening, two people who had been strangers for 8 years finally began to know each other.